It's the Sun Wot Won It on April 11, 1992. The day after the UK general election, the Sun newspaper ran its notorious headline, claiming to have tipped the electorate to the Conservative Party. Although the paper's owner, Rupert Murdoch, later said that the media does not have this kind of power, the headline articulates a central question in social science. Do print media exert a significant impact on political attitudes and electoral outcomes, and, if so, how? To examine this question, the University of Oxford and the London School of Hygiene and Tropical Medicine drew on a rare quasi-natural experiment that occurred when the Sun, a right-leaning UK tabloid, owned by News Corp, shifted its support to the Labour Party in 1997 and back to the Conservative Party in 2010. In their 2015 research paper titled, "It's the Sun Wot Won It," which is linked in the description page below, they compared changes in party identification and political attitudes among Sun readers with non-readers and other newspaper readerships. The researchers estimate that in 1997 there was a 7.43 percentage point increase in support for Labour over and above the trend. In 2010, the Sun's endorsement of the Conservatives increased support by 14.7 percentage points. Their analysis of the quasi-natural experiment revealed three important findings. First, the Sun can substantially influence party preferences among some of its readers. Second, although there were changes in party preference, there was no corresponding change in political attitude. Third, these effect sizes were substantial. Media endorsements were associated with a 2% increase in the share of the popular vote. The magnitude of these changes, about 2% of the popular vote, would have been unable to alter the outcome of the 1997 general election, but may have affected the 2010 election, the researchers claim. Interestingly, before the 1997 campaign, Blair actively courted Murdoch's support, meeting with Murdoch privately on numerous occasions and publicly advocated policies favourable to Murdoch, but contrary to previous Labour Party manifestos. After being elected, the Labour leader clearly backed Murdoch's interests, attacking, for example, an anti-Murdoch amendment to the competition bill which the Labour Party espoused and removing Clause 4 from their manifesto. Blair and Murdoch became such good friends that Blair became the godparent of one of Murdoch's daughters. Murdoch has regularly maintained close relationships with politicians, including Thatcher, Cameron and May. Theresa May, herself, had a secret meeting with him in 2016 and refuses to disclose a full account of the encounter. This shift of the Sun was exogenous for the readers because it was principally determined by Murdoch and occurred over a relatively short period of time. His decision was against the wishes of the Sun's surprised editorial board, who all favoured the Conservative candidate John Major. Stuart Higgins, the Sun's editor at the time, noted that this change occurred over a relatively short period of time in the build-up to the election in 1997 and had not been planned in advance. Murdoch was unlikely to be responding to readers' preferences because their support for Labour had begun declining after 1995. In 1997, voters changed their political party preferences based on an endorsement rather than new information about policy. Readers of The Sun were more likely than both non-readers and readers of other newspapers to feel closer to the Labour Party after The Sun endorsed Labour in 1997. The same pattern occurred, but in reverse, in association with the 2010 endorsement of the Conservative Party according to the researchers. Some positive outcome of the research is that the persuasiveness of the media tends to be reduced when recipients are politically knowledgeable and have strong and crystallized opinions about not just the content but, importantly, the source of the message. It's interesting to note here that Russian involvement in the meddling of elections has been pushed onto the national agenda while researched and proven corporate meddling in the elections goes largely undocumented, because who would publish it? The centralization of media ownership matters because of its potential to limit freedom of expression. Whoever owns the media owns the message. That is not to say proprietors always wish to control the message, but they can limit public discussion at times when they have an interest in particular public issues. Just keeping the focus on Rupert Murdoch, but I will make similar arguments against the BBC soon. Let's look what Murdoch said about Brexit. Murdoch is anti-EU, but not for the reason why many Brexiteers may be for Brexit. Anthony Hilton at the Evening Standard once asked Murdoch why he was anti-EU. That's easy, Murdoch, replied, and I quote, "When I go into Downing Street they do what I say, when I go to Brussels they take no notice," end quote. Now, whether you thought Brexit was good or not, you hopefully agree that the media should report the facts and not protect the interests of its owner. However, we should not just attack the private business. The public-funded BBC showed one of the most flagrant examples of media bias in the UK with regard its Brexit coverage. As a state broadcaster, the BBC is funded by the taxpayer and therefore is expected to be unbiased. However, the outlet has been proven by several studies to be biased in its reportage. A report by Citivers in conjunction with Newswatch, linked in the description, monitored Radio 4's flagship Today programme between 2005 and 2015 and found that only 3.2% of the guests had Eurosceptic views when discussing the EU. In addition, in the BBC EU coverage between 2002 and 2017, only 14 speakers, 0.2% of the total, were left-wing advocates for leaving the EU. Even today, many people associate Brexit with purely right-wing ideology, and news covering the 6 months after the EU referendum, only 2.9%, of 366 speaker contributions were from supporters of withdrawal from the EU. Another study, by the Institute of Economic Affairs, also linked, found in BBC flagship programmes, from June 2016 to December 2017, that, and I quote, "The imbalance on the two programs is substantial, consistent and at odds with public opinion. The analysis reveals a 2-to-1 bias in favour of those who voted for Remain," end quote. Not only that, but the BBC's international charity arm, BBC Media Action, actually accepted £2 million in funding from the EU in 2014-15, the lead-up to the Brexit referendum, while still claiming it wouldn't impact their referendum coverage. A detailed study by Professor Justin Lewis at Cardiff University of peak-time television news bulletins during the course of the Iraq War, linked to the Guardian article below, showed that the BBC was more reliant than any of its rivals on government and military sources. Over the 3 weeks of conflict, 11% of the sources quoted by the BBC were of coalition government or military origin, the highest proportion of all the main television broadcasters. The BBC was the least likely to quote official Iraqi sources, and less likely than Sky, ITV or Channel 4 News to use independent, and often skeptical, sources such as the Red Cross. The study found the BBC placed least emphasis on Iraqi casualties, which were mentioned in 22% of its stories about the Iraqi people. Casualties received most prominence on Channel 4 News, figuring in 40% of its reports about Iraqis. The corporation was least likely to report on the unhappiness of Iraqis about the invasion. A second study was carried out by the Media Tenor Group for a German newspaper which looked at broadcasters in 5 countries. Their findings revealed that the BBC gave less airtime to dissenting views than any other broadcaster, with 2% of airtime given over to dissenting views, lower even than the US broadcaster ABC, which featured 7%. The problem here is that the media no longer informs people. Yes, 2 sides of the view are given, but highly biased in their content, which leaves the average electorate uninformed and biased. Noam Chomsky sums this situation up nicely. The public relations industry, which essentially runs the elections, is applying certain principles to undermine democracy which are the same as the principles that applies to undermine markets. The last thing that business wants is markets in the sense of economic theory. Take a course in economics, they tell you a market is based on informed consumers making rational choices. Anyone who's ever looked at a TV ad knows that's not true. In fact, if we had a market system, an ad, say for General Motors, would be a brief statement of the characteristics of the products for next year. That's not what you see. You see some movie actress or a football hero or somebody driving a car up a mountain or something like that. And that's true of all advertising. The goal is to undermine markets by creating uninformed consumers who will make irrational choices, and the business world spends huge efforts on that. The same is true when the same industry, the PR industry, turns to undermining democracy. It wants to construct elections in which uninformed voters will make irrational choices. It's pretty reasonable, and it's so evident you can hardly miss it. The point I am finally getting to is that media is a business when in the private hands. It sells advertisements, not information. Google works on the same principle. we use it for free, but it's a multi-billion-dollar business. When in government hands, it can become a tool to support the government. If you think the BBC is left-wing, it is not. Just look at how they treated Jeremy Corbyn. It's pro-establishment. Also Google around, there are many articles which say it's right-wing, others that it's left. I think it does what's in the government's interest, right or left. Hopefully by being more aware of the ownership and the inherent bias that brings, this propaganda filter becomes weaker.